so let's do a little bit of reflection from the previous lesson. So in the last lesson, the main thing that we did was we moved from this idea of just lists of data to data in a table format, normally with an interval, let's have a look, interval as the one column and frequency as the other column. And so we started to look at data that was grouped into collections. Now, when we did that, we also calculated two other columns sometimes. And I was just wondering from the class, what were the two other columns that we sometimes calculated after doing, sort of being given an initial data table? Can anyone remember?
Mr. Is?
Yes.
I just got a message now that some students received the wrong link to the lesson. So is it possible for us to stall a bit? Because I see
Yes,
the student count is low.
Okay, no, definitely. So I think what we'll do is we'll just pause for a second. And then while we wait for the students, we'll just do a bit of a recap from the previous lesson. So in the previous lesson, the big thing was we were working with grouped data, and we had to find a couple of different measures of central tendency, but in the context of grouped data. And so we had to find the estimated mean, so the estimated mean, and we also found the modal interval, and we found the median interval. So it's almost like we were finding the mean, the mode, and the median, but for the way that we do it with grouped data. Now, when we did these calculations, we had to sometimes add additional columns. And so I just want to look, so I see Vuyani has said, sometimes we added a column for the cumulative frequency. And you're absolutely right, Vuyani. Sometimes we add a cumulative frequency column. Now, can you tell me, was there another column that we sometimes also used to calculate when we had these grouped data tables? Aha, Nobuseto, yes, it's the midpoint. So sometimes we had to calculate the cumulative frequency, sometimes we had to calculate the midpoint. Now, can you tell me which of these three so for example, if you were calculating the midpoint, which of these three measures that we were calculating did the midpoint help us with? Which of these three? So the estimated mean would be 1, 2 would be the modal interval, 3 would be the median interval. Which of these three did the midpoint column help us with? Any ideas? What does the midpoint? So in the context of this example, the midpoint would just be iPhone and not Tobacco. You're absolutely right. It's the estimated mean. So calculating the midpoint is very helpful when you're doing the estimated mean. Yeah. An example of finding the midpoint would just be what's between halfway between 0 and 10. You just go 0 plus 10 divided by 2, and the midpoint would be 5. The second midpoint would be 15, and so on. And so that's what a lot of the last lesson was about. Now, what was the cumulative frequency column helpful for calculating? Does anybody remember what was the cumulative frequency column helpful for calculating? Any ideas? So just to remind you how the cumulative frequency count would go, for the first interval, it would be 1, and then it would be 3, and then it would be 14, and so on. Okay, so it's position, Owami's correct, and so it would help us find the median interval. And so often we would calculate these extra columns to help us work stuff out. Now, in the next lesson, we'll also talk about something called an ogive, or cumulative frequency curve, and the cumulative frequency column will also become helpful at that point. And now, just to close this off, if you're looking for the modal interval, then we just looked at the frequency column, because the modal interval would just be the interval that had the most in it. And so we just look at ordinary frequency. Okay, so that was a little bit of a recap from the previous lesson. Now, going forward today, I'm going to start by showing you how to use your calculator to find the estimated mean. And so we're going to watch a little video clip. I want you to watch it once and try and have your calculator with you. And then we'll watch it again where I go through it a second time just to make sure you understand what's going on. And then we'll test out your knowledge. So what I'm going to show you initially is a video clip. It's about 2 minutes long, showing how to calculate the estimated mean. And let's just watch it first, and then I'll talk to you in a second.
I'm going to need to enter setup. So we're going to press shift.
Okay, wait, let's go from the beginning.
In this video, we're going to look at how to use your Casio calculator to work out the mean for a group frequency table such as this.
So in this video, he's just using that data set as an example, and we can probably use it as well through this part of the lesson. But there'll be time, I've got it written down on the side.
Age 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and 20 to 40. We've got the frequencies 5, 4, and 11. So first of all, we're going to get our Casio calculator. I'm using the FX991ES, but it can be any modern Casio. And first of all, we're going to need to enter setup. So we're going to press shift and setup. The reason is...
Okay, so step one was hit shift and setup.
Our table to have a frequency column. So we've got some options here.
So again, he said we need to add a frequency column to our data set. And so that's the first step we're going to need to do, because our group data table always has a frequency column.
Press down, and number 4, you can see the word stat, so you press that.
So he hit down, and then he hit number 4. And in fact, you know what? I'm going to let this video go completely, and then I'll come back and do it a second time. So let's just watch this.
It says frequency on or off. We want to turn the frequency on. Now we're going to need to change our calculator into statistics mode. You can see the statistics button here hasn't been selected, so we press mode, and then statistics is number 3. And we're given some options, and we choose number 1. The 1 minus 5. Now we've got...
Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second again and show you guys, can you see how there's an extra column that is added to when you can input data?
Columns, we've got the first one, which is X, and the second one, which is frequency. Now we do need to work out our midpoints ourselves, okay? So for the first category, our midpoint would be 5. For the second category, it would be 15. And for the third one, it's going to be 30. So let's input those. So 5 equals 15 equals and 30 equals. It's automatically changed all our frequencies to 1, 1, and 1. We're going to need to change those to 5, 4, and 11. So 5, 4, and 11. And what we're going to now do is we're going to press the AC button. Now don't worry, this data has been stored. So we press AC, and then we want this stats mode on the calculator here. So we're going to press shift and then stat. And we've got some options. Again, we choose number 4. And we want the mean. So the mean is number 2, which is the X bar. So number 2 equals, and we've been given our mean, which is 20.75. So the mean for the set of information, this group frequency table, is 20.75.
Okay, now that was a lot of talking, and I know that was way too fast for you to do it the first time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take you through the key steps for the process. And I'm going to turn the audio off. But I would like to see any questions in the chat before I go and show you those key steps. So as we look at this video, the first thing he does is he shows us how to turn on the extra frequency column for this data set. Okay, so let's just see what the key steps that he did. So he went to shift, and then he hit setup. And then once he was at setup, he hit the down arrow. So we'll see that in a second. And it's almost like a magical menu pops up where you have stat. And then you hit 4. And then you get the choice of frequency on or off. So what we'll do at that point is we just go frequency on by clicking 1. And now what has happened is you've enabled an extra frequency column. I see there was a question from the class. Level, can you unmute that student so they can ask a question?
Yes.
Hmm.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good, sir. So I wanted to say, when you press 4, it does, my calculator doesn't say on and off. It just says f of x, and then for 2, it says f of x and then something else. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
So it doesn't work exactly like it is here.
Yes, sir.
Aha. So let us know, because it might be in the previous lesson, I taught you how to do it just manually. And it might be that today, then we don't, how many students, maybe just give us a vote in the, oh, Kukle is saying we have to press 3. Okay, so on your model calculator, you press 3 instead of 4, because you want to get that stat thing, which turns the frequency on or off. All right. Okay, so let's just continue through this process again. And so what happens then is we are going to click stat and then variance. So 1, and then we should get data table. And in that data table, we are going to enter our data. Now, the only thing that's different is the X values are the midpoint of the interval, and the frequency column is basically the extra column. And so guys, can we just take a moment, see if you can get the answer to this question that he did, which should be, I think it was, the data set is 0 to 10, 10 to 20. Let's just see that you get the answer he gets, which was 25.4. So if I want you to try and calculate the estimated mean using your calculator, and then put the answer that you get in the chat now. Okay, so take a moment. It will take a bit of time. And then I want you to see, what do you get for your estimated mean? If you are stuck and you don't know what's going on, you can raise your hand. How do I get to the table? So you go Shift Stats. Let's have a look here. Okay, so you want to know how to get to the table. So what happens is there's 2 ways of doing it. It's to go into the stat mode, or you can go through data. Okay, what do you do after you turn the frequency on? Okay, let me give you another thing here. What you do to get to the data, let me turn this guy off for a second. And let me get my data set that I also have, that we know that he was working on. Yes, so the data set from the question is this. And after you've turned the frequency columns on, these should be your instructions. But you have to turn that frequency column on first. Okay, now once you've got an answer for your estimated mean for this table, I want you to put that in the chat. What's your estimated mean for this particular data set?
Mr. Ace?
Yeah.
Can you take a question from Nicole?
I can, yes. Go ahead, Nicole. What's your question? Can you unmute her?
Yes, yeah. I did. She's not unmuting on her side.
Okay, no problem. So guys, we should be getting an estimated mean of 20.75. Okay. Now, let's go to, I can't see that, participants. So let's try and unmute Kukle. Kukle, what's your question?
Hi, sir. I just wanted to know, so once we've already put in our data on the calculator, what we press to get our estimated mean?
You go Shift, you go AC, and then you go Shift Stat.
Shift Stat.
Yeah, so if you just listen here, so if you look at the screen, you go Shift Stat 1, and then you hit 4, and then you hit 2. And the 2 is giving you the mean. Now, you can do it either the manual way or the calculator way, but I just thought I wanted to show you the calculator way because sometimes it may be advantageous to do it like that. Okay, so now let's go on. How do you enter the data? So Komotsile, you are asking about once you've turned the frequency, here's the instructions to get to entering data. Shift stat var, that should get you to entering data. And then to enter the frequencies, you just keep on putting them, the midpoints equal, then frequencies, and then to actually get the mean, you use this. However, you have to turn the frequency column on and off first if you are doing a grouped frequency. Okay, guys, I'm going to move on to, let's do a second example. I'm going to bring this little screen with me. And this is from the previous lesson. So we know what the answer is, but I want you to try and calculate for me the estimated mean for this data table just using your calculator. Okay, so you're going to have to clear the data. So often going out of stats mode and back in again can be helpful for that. And I want you to obviously use the midpoints for these things. So use the midpoints for these intervals, type in these frequencies, and then give me the estimated mean. Okay. And these, I'll leave these instructions on the board, and I want to see what you guys get for your estimated mean. So the good news is once you've got the skill, it's piece of cake, but you do need to take a bit of time to get used to how to punch it in your calculator. And if there are any questions, you can raise your hand and I'll help you where I can. So once you've got your estimated mean, for this example, you can just pop it in the chat, and then we'll compare the answers we're getting. Okay, Nobusetu has given us an answer, and Nicole has given us an answer, and William's given us an answer. And guys, what I notice is you're all getting the same answer, and it may not be everyone's there yet, but you're quite right, 25.67. Okay, so what have we learned to do? We've learned how to turn on the frequency column for data capture. And what this means is that we can now use that to calculate the estimated mean. And we can also use it to calculate basically any mean where we have a frequency column. So it doesn't even, like, we can use that even to calculate an exact mean if instead of intervals, they've given you actual data and then a frequency column. This approach will also work for that. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the next part of the lesson now, but I think that even if you're a little bit confused, if you rewatch this first part of the lesson, you'll have a valuable skill that you can take with you going forward. Okay. All right. Guys, if you're having problems with this, just let us know in the chat. But let's move on to the second part of the lesson. Okay, so the second part of the lesson is about something called a histogram. And a histogram is really just a chart that displays intervals along the bottom, so intervals of data on the x-axis, and frequencies on the vertical axis. Okay, so on the y-axis. And so I've got a little question for you. Before we start drawing histograms, I want you to answer me this question. And it says here, a class carried out an experiment to measure the lengths of cuckoo eggs. The length of each egg was measured to the nearest millimeter. The results are shown in the following histogram. So the length of the eggs to each millimeter, if it was 19.3, it would be in that column. If the length was between, if it was 22.3, it would be in that column. And so these are intervals of data along the bottom, and then we have the frequency on the top. And the question is, how many eggs were measured altogether in the experiment? Is it A, B, C, or D? That's what I want to know. So this is, I'm giving you a histogram and you are interpreting this histogram. How would we know how many eggs were measured altogether? So I suppose I could say, well, there's one here, about 8, about 17, about 40, about 25, about 7. Okay, so yeah. Okay, guys, so what I did was I looked at each interval and I said, how many approximately are there in each interval in terms of a count? And remember, if I want how many eggs were measured in total, it's basically a cumulative frequency of all these columns. And so if you look at it, it's going to get closest to 100. And so the correct answer would be D. Now, what I want you to do next is I want you guys to draw me a data table from this histogram. It's almost like you're going backwards. So I want you to think about what would the data table look like. We know we have interval, and we know that we have frequency. And I want to think, can you recreate this data table? See if you can do that. It's almost like we're working backwards, which will allow us to draw histograms later on. So this will be basically, we'll say X is, let's go like that. In fact, let's just use this for today for ease of use. So the first interval was 19 to 20, 20 to 21, 24. Now, I'm not worrying too much about where they're included exactly for today. But what you can see is that we can actually go backwards from a histogram. And if I look at this, that looks like it's a 1. The second one would be an 8. 6, I think that is about 17. 40. 25. And then about 8. Okay, so all I wanted to show you is that if I give you a histogram, you can always, okay, absolutely. So it probably is more correct to write this as basically where you have an X in between. So you have like an X, and then you say, well, X is greater than or equal to 19 and less than or equal to 20. But just for the sake of time today, I'm not going to go into that exactly because it's almost not clear from the drawing. It's a bit ambiguous. So I wasn't going to have that debate, but you're right. Normally you would see it a bit more like that. And you can write it like that. Yes. Okay. I'll tell you what, let's do another histogram question. So it says here, Jim measured the temperature at 2 p.m. at the same spot in his garden and recorded his results to the nearest degree for each day of the year. The results are shown in the following histogram. And it says here, on approximately how many days was the 2 p.m. temperature above 70 degrees Fahrenheit? So what they're saying is, well, I'll let you interpret that. And maybe there's a question, but which of these 4 options do you think it's going to be? So each of these is saying he's measuring it each day of the year. And on some of the days, it's between 30 and 40. And some of the days, it's between 40 and 50. And the question is asking how many days was the temperature above 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I want to see, can you work it out from the drawing? Remember, a histogram always has a frequency on the one side and then intervals along the bottom. Ask yourself, when was the temperature above 7? Which intervals would the temperature be above 70 degrees? I think these are the intervals that are above, well, it's not 70 degrees, 70 Fahrenheit. So then I ask myself, what is the frequency count in this column? And it looks to me to be about 25, give or take. And if I look at this one over here, it looks to me to be about, well, let's say about 15, somewhere around there, 14, 15. And so which of these options are going to be involved? Okay, so the correct answer is going to be B. Okay, so these histograms aren't actually too bad. And again, you can see how these would be connected to a frequency table, right? You could easily draw up a frequency table from this. And what's more, if you can draw up a frequency table, it means that even for this data set, you could find the estimated mean, or the, you could also find the modal interval. Just another question, I'm going to add another question. What is the modal interval for this data set? So you answered the question B correct, but I want to know, what is the modal interval for this data that is shown in a histogram? And I want you to think back, what does it mean to be a modal interval? Think about what the mode means. What's the modal interval for this data set? Okay, I see some answers coming through. Let them keep on coming. So the modal interval is the one that occurs the most. So it's going to have to be this one over here. And so it's going to be between 40 and 50. Yeah. Now for the median interval, we would probably need a bit more help from our table. Okay, so if I was asking you about the median interval, we would probably have to do some more calculations. Well, we wouldn't have to have a table, but it would be helpful. Okay, let's do one more, and then we're going to take a break. Okay, so Jim measured the daily rainfall in millimeters at the same spot in his garden for each day in the year. So this is rainfall. He recorded the results to the nearest millimeter. Results are shown in a histogram. How many days was the rainfall less than 10 millimeters? And approximately how many days, and then which of the four options are you going to go? So I see Nicole has an answer locked in. Who else has an answer going on? So how would I think about this? So I'm looking for, all of these together must add up to 365 because it says he measured it every day of the year. But I want it when it's less than 10, which probably means that these are the intervals of data that I'm most interested in. Okay. So if I'm most interested in those less than 10 millimeters, then I need to count how many there are in this one. And so this looks about 80 to me, and this looks about 135 or somewhere around there. And so to me, it looks like the answer should be about 216, and that should be option D. Okay, so what we're going to do after the break is we are going to practice drawing a histogram And so this before the break, it was just about getting familiar with histograms like we did. Okay, time for an exercise break. So I want everybody, cameras on, and I want to see you stand up. And Lebo, if you could please give a shout out to our wonderful stretching students. I'm going to do the same. I can't move my camera today because I'm on my laptop, but I want to see you stretch it out.
Come on, guys.
Be the best bright shining lights that you can be, guys. Come on.
Give your body a break. Give your mind a break.
We want to see your lovely faces too.
Shout out to William. And Nobesutu. Shout out to Lusanda. Yes.
Yes, my people. There we go. Nobesetu. Maths is hard work. You need to give yourself some time off. Yeah, we can't
Definitely.
just all the time.
Shout out to Lilita.
Come on. There we go. Oh, I feel that. There we go. Guys, that is looking awesome. I love seeing enthusiastic students on the other side. It just makes my day. And I also just want, it's just, yeah, I don't know, it's just a human thing. It's fantastic to see you guys out there. Okay, let's have a little brain break. So the first pieces of the space station launched in who knows what. This puzzle will help you figure out this information. So when was the first piece of the space station launched? You have to figure out this problem. So a tip would be that these are definitely going to be 9 each. So that's 9, different color. 9, 9. And then I see a couple of different answers coming in. This would be 50. There's 9 plus 50. And there's 2 of these little space guys. So that's 100 minus what gives me 20. So 100 minus 80 would give me 20. So let's make sure we got that. Plus, if that's 80 plus 9 plus 9, what's that going to be? So it's going to be 98. 80 plus 9 is 89 plus 9 is 98.
Well
So
done, guys.
1998, it says the first piece of the space station was launched in 1998. I did not know that. That's quite recent. Sure.
Yeah, I didn't know it either.
Well done to Awami and Ratabile and Alita. You guys did really well. And a whole bunch of other people smashed that question. Well done. It was kind of fun. I like these novelty NASA questions.
Yes.
Okay. Let's get back to drawing a histogram now. So most of the time exam questions, they give you a histogram, but every now and again they ask you to draw a histogram. And so I want you to please draw me a histogram now. I'm giving you a frequency table, and the steps you need to worry about are basically draw and label the horizontal and vertical axis, represent the frequency on the vertical axis, and choose the classes on the horizontal axis, and then use the frequencies as the heights and draw vertical bars for each class. So see if you can draw a histogram. And a histogram is just showing basically grouped data. So you've got 3 minutes. You can do it. So step one should always be basically to draw your axes. I'm not going to draw the whole graph for you because I'll bring the answer up, but you're going to have some sort of vertical axis and some sort of horizontal axis. Oh, I've managed to. And then once you've managed to complete that, just give me a done in the chat. So this would be frequency, and then these markings would be basically the data intervals that we have. So this would just be a percentage in this particular question. So I'm just going to put here 10. Now, obviously, you should be doing this a little bit neater because you're doing it on paper. Oops, that. 90, and that's how far it goes. Okay, so in the very first one, let's make it 1, 2. And I'll just say 5, 6, 10. And so just give me a done in the chat when you've finished this task. So your very first bar was up to 2. And so it would probably look something like that, right? So that would be this one here. And the second one, 20 to 30, would be up to a count of 4. And so it looked like that. Okay. And so, yeah, every now and again, you do get an exam question where they have this type of thing. So this is also before, so it's in line like that. Okay, so what should the final answer look like? Now, I think putting numbers along like this is perfectly fine, but your final answer, so you don't have to put the intervals below. You can just put 0, 10, 20, 30, and so on like I did. But this is what the, I'll answer your question now, Lusanda. Okay. So this should be what your histogram would look like. I would say that you should have a frequency column or number of learners, but it's the frequency, and then your groups of percentages along the bottom. Okay, so Lusanda has asked, how do you find the median on a histogram? Okay, so what you need to know is I would say the easiest way to find it is probably to have a data table. So just recreate a data table from this data. So basically, and then use the process we learned about in previous lessons. The other way to do it is to count through it on the graph, but I think doing the data table will be easier. So my suggestion would be take the histogram, make a quick data table, and then do the calculations that we did in the previous lesson to help you find the median. You do need, in order to find the median, you're always going to have to find the position of the median. And so in this particular setup, the position of the median, okay, well, you could count through the graph. So there were 50 students in total. So you can see there were 50 students. If you want the position of the median, you're just going to use the formula 1/2 times n plus 1. And in this particular scenario, n was 50. Okay, so it'll be 1/2 times 50 plus 1. So that would be 25.5. Actually, you don't have to do a group data table, because you can say, well, if it's in position 25.5, how far into this histogram is 25.5? So you've got, basically, I would go and find position 25.5, and I would actually start with the original table. So I'd basically add a cumulative frequency column, and see when you get to position 25.5. That's basically what I would do. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. I would just look at the original table that you used before it, or I would create a table and then just find position 25.5. Okay, now guys, there's one other chart. We're not going to get to it completely today, but there's something called a frequency polygon. And a frequency polygon is very connected to a histogram. Would anybody like to come online and tell me how a frequency polygon and a histogram are connected? So a histogram is one graph we draw of group data, but sometimes we draw a frequency polygon, and we can draw a frequency polygon from a histogram. Does anybody know how to do that?
Mr. S, Lucinda's hand is up.
Okay, will you unmute Lysanda and she can have a comment there?
Will do.
So I think how you find the polygon thing,
Yes.
you find the points you got for the histogram, but in a line form, not in a bar graph.
Mr. S?
Yeah. So what you do, find the middle category. Yeah.
Sorry, there's a bit of a lag there.
Okay, I'll say it again. So if you're drawing, so I got Lysanda's, what she was saying, if you find the middle of each interval of data, right? So if you find the middle of each interval of data in your group data table, and you add an extra interval on each side, the way you draw a frequency polygon is you just draw straight lines between each of the midpoints. So I'm not, but basically you just draw straight lines between each of the midpoints of the data, and then you add 2 extra intervals at the end, and those intervals will always go down to 0. Okay, so that is what I would, that's how you draw a frequency polygon. Okay, now let's draw one more histogram to finish today. And then when you draw that histogram, I also want you to draw a frequency polygon on top of it, if that makes sense. So draw a histogram now using this data set. And then I want you to draw a frequency polygon on top of that using that idea that I just showed you. So Cindy's asked the question. Yeah?
No, sorry, I was talking about Cindy's question.
Okay.
I see you saw it.
So would a question like determine the lower quartile interval on a histogram? Okay, so Cindy, I'm going to say, let's save that question for the lesson where we do ogives. You can, but you're just going to get an interval. You can't get an exact, that question goes more with what's called an ogive. And so I'm just going to press pause for now on that. In a histogram, all you can get is you can get an interval that would correspond to the lower quartile. And you'd use the same calculation as you normally would with the lower quartile. Lolita has asked, do the lines need to be straight? They do, Lolita. It's a polygon, and a polygon will always have straight lines. So a frequency polygon has 2 main ideas. It's straight lines joining the midpoints of the intervals, and then you add an extra interval at the beginning and the end so that it gets back down to the ground. Yeah. Okay, so just click a done in the chat when you are done with that. So step 1 is just going to be having our column. Step 2 will just be having our intervals here. And Looks something like that. Now, I think because the frequency column goes much higher, I'm going to use a higher, I'm going to make this 5. And on the bottom, I'm going to go 5. Okay, so what does this look like? Wait, no, it's not right there. So basically, once you've got the histogram, and I'm going to bring up the answer in a moment, what I'm mainly interested in is you should get a graph. And if I'm going a bit faster, I apologize, guys. It's just that we just want to squeeze this in before the end of the lesson. But you should get a histogram that looks something like that. Except I would probably have my intervals just going 0, 10, and so on. In order to get the frequency polygon, what we would do is we would find the midpoints of these intervals, and then we'd add an extra interval at the beginning and the end. And then what we would do is we'd start by drawing a straight line from the midpoint of the first interval up to here, then a straight line up to here, straight line to there, straight line down to there, then to there. These should all be ruler straight lines, straight line and straight line like that. And so this is these charts are probably the simplest charts to do in the whole section, but essentially all they're doing is they're showing us a representation graphically of a frequency table. And the histogram is probably the more common, but sometimes in exam questions, you see them ask you to do a frequency polygon. And the easiest way to do a frequency polygon is just to find the midpoints of the intervals and connect them. In the next lesson, what I'm going to do is I will show you a little bit more about the frequency polygon. But basically today we've done quite a lot, and I think it's time to call it to close. Okay. Lebo, if you could please put a link to the quiz in the chat. And guys, I just want to say it's been awesome being with you today. I hope that you have learned something in today's lesson. I know I went rather quickly, but there was quite a lot of data stuff. If you felt I went a bit quickly, remember there is a recording, and so you can rewatch that if there was some element of it that you're unsure of. Otherwise, you can also ask questions at the beginning of the next lesson. Okay. Pleasure, William. I'm glad that you enjoyed it.